Oui, 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 oui.
Alô, vocês me escutam bem? Boa tarde. Boa tarde a todas e todos. Eu sou Philippe Freller, professor novo aqui no Departamento de Ciência Política. Não sei se todos me conhecem. Eu e o professor Rurion Melo estamos organizando essa conferência especial com o professor Philippe Urfalino, como é um convidado não brasileiro, eu passo agora para o inglês também, perdoem o meu inglês, e apresento então o professor Urfalino. It is my pleasure to present you Professor Philippe Urfalino. Mr. Urfalino is Director of Studies at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, the EHESS, the École de Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. He has a very interesting intellectual trajectory. His first research is focused on cultural policy. He even has a book published in Brazil about it, A Invenção da Política Cultural, published by SESC Publisher in 2016. By the way, Mr. Urfalino will be giving a course on the subject of this book at the SESC Research and Training Center this Friday, for those who are interested. He has also researched about sanitary control of medicines, and in recent years, his main research areas have been the sociology of decision-making and collective deliberation, collective entities, and political and social philosophy. He published a very important book about collective decision-making in 2021. It's Décider ensemble, la fabrique de l'obligation collective, or Deciding Together, the Factory of Collective Obligation, in direct translation to English, which was an award-winning book in France. I would say that Mr. Urfalino mobilizes tools from analytic philosophy in order to clarify important concepts in political and social theory, such as the concepts of decision and deliberation. This work involves questioning the nature of collective entities, such as the people, the nation, the body politic in general, insofar as the normative character of the decision derives from the authority of this collective whole over its members. In this way, we can say that Urfalino also dialogues with the sociological tradition, especially a French sociological tradition regarding the nature of the collective whole and the way in which it is a source of authority and normative obligation. In the work that will be presented today, Urfalino brings his discussions on collective decision-making closer to the field of democratic theory, discussing the concept of self-government and its relationship with representative democracy. It is a very important topic for us in the area of political theory at USP's Department of Political Science, and that's why I'm very pleased to give the floor to Professor Urfalino.
Thank you so much, Philippe. First of all, I want to express my gratitude for the colleagues, Professor Rurion Melo and Philippe Freller, for organizing this meeting. And secondly, I have to apologize to not be able to speak in your language and to use my bad English for trying to be understandable. But nevertheless, I am very happy to have the opportunity to present some of the ideas I'm developing in a book in progress on representative democracy. So these thoughts today will be focused only on one topic, which is the relationship between representative democracy and self-government. The notion, the idea of self-government is, I think so, central in the definition of democracy, because we used to say democracy is the power of the people, but also the notion of self-government is central to the formulation of its ideal. The etymology contributes to this, equating it with the power of the people or government by the people. We know a famous formulation by Abraham Lincoln, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Obviously, the idea of self-government is in the by the people. This formulation, for example, has been retained verbatim in the principle of a French Republic in the 1958 Constitution. It is only one example. In a more precise formulation, we can find the idea of self-government about the relationship between citizens and laws. There, the idea will be the self-legislation. Because the law has no source other than popular sovereignty, citizens obey the law insofar as they consent to it. This consent derives from their participation in the production of laws. Self-government, here assimilate to self-legislation, appears to be respected when citizens are the producers of the norms of which they are the recipients. The notion of self-government also comes into play in debates on the nature and on the value of representative democracy. This notion is frequently used to question the democratic nature of representative democracy. Is representative democracy truly democratic if representative democracy is not self-government? An examination of a range of theories or conceptions of modern democracy leads us to consider 4 different answers to these questions. I found, reading some works about modern democracy, 4 kind of statements. The first one is representative democracy is an acceptable approximation of self-government. We will see that it is, for example, the position of Hans Kelsen and Jürgen Habermas. Another statement is representative democracy is one possible form of government that respects self-government. A third statement is representative democracy contradicts, is the opposite in some way to the notion of self-government. This statement is the statement of people advocating for direct democracy, but it could be also for a political theorist as Bernard Manin in his famous book, The Principles of Representative Government, who is not against representative democracy. He tried to give an idea of what it is exactly representative democracy, and for him, it is not at all self-government. And the fourth statement I have isolated is the idea that representative democracy, to be truly democratic, requires direct citizen participation, by the way of some settings, some procedures. And if we use these settings of what we call participative democracy, the democracy will approximate self-government. But the approximation is not given. It must be sought. So these are the four statements I have in mind. I would like to show that this diversity of responses to the question, is representative democracy a way of self-government? This diversity is due to the fact that the notion of self-government is not univocal. It is the subject of diverse conceptions, and not all aspects of these conceptions are always made explicit. So I will try to clarify the notion of self-government which are used in different works in order to grasp the nature of representative democracy and to provide a more solid basis for its evaluation. This effort of clarification will lead me to assert that in a demanding way, self-government is a myth. I have to precise that when I say self-government is a myth, my idea is not that self-government is a kind of utopia, a well-conceived kind of society of government which we can hope we hope to live in, but it's not possible to realize it, for example. This is a way to characterize utopia. No, when I say that self-government is not a myth, I don't want to say it is an utopia. I want to say that it is a badly shaped concept. So my conception of myth is the same as the conception of some philosophers, for example, as Quine, when he was talking about the myth of meaning, or when in France Jacques Bouvresse was talking about the myth of interiority. It's not about utopia, it's about concepts which are not well shaped and which in fact drive us in resentment, which have no clear conclusion. So I have to explain that. First of all, I have to propose a demanding formulation of self-government. What it is exactly self-government? My statement is that when we speak of a self-government, of an entity, it could be a political body, it could be a group, never mind, people, we tend to make, in fact, two assertions, and to think that these assertions are mutually reinforcing. The first assertion is about the self-government of a group as a group. And the second assertion relates to the individuals who make up the group. And we say that individuals govern themselves. I begin with the implication of the idea of a group self-government. First, let's look at what is implied by the prefix auto, added to self, added to government, when applied to a group. And I will take the example of what automobile. The word is untrustable in English and in Portuguese. Okay. Yeah. What is an automobile? It is a mobile, a chassis with wheels. We can move it in pushing it or in pulling it. An automobile, when we had the prefix auto, we think that this mobile has something which give it the possibility to move by itself. You have a motor, you have a pilot, and you have an automobile. And we can think in the same way the self-government of a group. What is the self-government of a group? Is a group which is able to be governed by itself. And it is the example we had in the antiquity, when in the Greek police it was said that a city was autonomous if people inside the city could use their own laws and not the laws which had been imposed by another city. So this is the view I have of the first perspective of the self-government. The self-government of a group or of a political body. But this view, which I think we cannot escape from, is not enough. Because if it would be enough, a city governed by a tyrant or a king will be self-governed. It's not our conception of self-government. If you have a king in a city who is governing, it's not for us the concept of self-government. So we need to add to the self-government of a political body, we have to add another perspective, which is the self-government of individuals. What is this notion of self-government of individuals? Obviously, it's not the idea that individuals are governing themselves. That is not government. It's a way to travel. But it is not government. No. We can speak of self-government of the individuals when we are talking about the way people in participating to the government of a group are also governing themselves. So they participate to the government, and for example, if they participate to a collective decision, they participate to the legislation, they are the authors of the legislations, of the decisions, and they are the people who have to obey, which are obliged by the laws and the decision making they have participate to produce it, to produce. In this way, the governed people who are the objects of acts of government are also the governors. Self-government, when we consider it from the point of view of individuals, is defined by the identity of the governed and the governors. In this way, with these two perspectives of self-government, the notion of self-government can be applied to a political entity as well as to the individuals who make it up. This doubling of a self-governing suppositum, and I use the concept of classic philosophy, you can see it in Aquinas or Leibniz, for example. What is a suppositum? This is the answer to the question at which entity I can attribute the action. Who is the agent? So, this doubling of a self-governing suppositum is rarely noticed and problematized, although it always seems to me be present, at least implicitly, in the formulations of self-government. The only originality of my remarks, if there is one, is to highlight this duplication and draw the consequences of the fact that there is two supposita of self-government. And I will try to demonstrate that this notion is a myth, it's an impossible concept, because there is these two supposita, and the condition of satisfaction of the self-government of the group and of the self-government of the individuals, the satisfaction of both is impossible. It is what exactly I call the myth of self-government. I will try to show the problem in the most famous formulation of self-government. Even if Rousseau do not use the word, it is usually held as the main author which very soon propose a kind of self-government. As it is well known, at the beginning of his book of a social contract, he formulates the problems he wanted to deal with. To find a form of association that will defend and protect the person and goods of each associate with the full common force, and by means of which each, uniting with all, nevertheless obey only himself and remain as free as before. What he has formulated as the problem he was dealing with, we can say that this formulation, it is exactly the formulation of self-government, of the organization of self-government. My point is not to know if he succeed or not. My point is to see if there is a form of organization that should be approached and that should be satisfying this problem. And it is by this way I will try to show that it is not possible. So I borrow the expression of myth of self-government to the famous lawyer, German lawyer, Ernst Bokenford, a very great specialist of constitution. But he used extensively this notion, and in a way very interesting, but my conception, I think, is quite different, so I will not comment his his work, even if I have to pay my debt to him. For trying to show why it is impossible, we can imagine a small society very close to the usual view of democratic Athens in the 4th century before Christ. And a kind of direct democracy, but a very simplified one without council, without dicasteria, without bulle, only the ecclesia. And we can say that if in this direct democracy people are governing themselves, they have to use some rules for collective decision. And if they are concerned by equality of the weight of each vote, they will use majority rule, which is the only rule whose respect exactly the equality of the votes. In some way, in a very obvious way, for each decision, the self-government of a group will be perfectly respected, satisfied, but not the self-government of individuals. I am saying something obvious, I'm sorry, but it is very obvious. And in this case, people do not stay free as they were before the entrance in the political society. And some contemporary authors of Rousseau write it. For example, Élie Louzac, in a letter, anonymous letter to Monsieur Jean-Jacques Rousseau, objected that such a form was impossible, since, he wrote, full liberty is incompatible with commitments. Yet Rousseau seems to have answered such an objection in advance. In chapter 7 of the Sovereign, he has written, the act of association involves a reciprocal between the public and private individuals, and that each individual, by contracting, so to speak, with himself, finds himself engaged in a twofold relation, namely as a member of a sovereign toward private individuals, and as a member of a state. The meaning of a state at this time was society for us. Towards, a member of a society, towards the sovereign. But, so the first thing he is saying is that after the entrance in the civil society, each member has two status. Each of the citizens is a private individual, as member of a state, which has to obey to the sovereign. But in the same way, each citizen is a member of a sovereign. And Rousseau had, but here the maxim of civil right, that no one is bound by the engagement toward himself, does not apply. You have maybe in mind that it is something well known in the history of philosophy. It has been noted by Hobbes and later by Kant that we cannot oblige ourselves. It's logically impossible, because if I am the one who command and the one who obey, if I'm not happy to obey, I have to only to change my commandment, as I am the commander too. Okay. So logically, it's not possible to be bound by engagements toward ourselves. But Rousseau, in a very wonderful sentence, say that there is a great difference between assuming an obligation toward oneself and assuming a responsibility toward a whole of which one is a part. So there is no contradiction in this case, because when we engage toward ourselves, it's not a relationship only between me and me. It is this engagement, but also by the way of the whole. So when I am engaged toward myself in the same movement, the whole, all the other individuals are engaged, and I am engaged toward the whole, all the other individuals. So we are not in relationship between only two aspects of me, of the individual. But in this sentence, there is not only a way to go through the logical impossibility. There is also something is appearing, and what is appearing is the idea of a whole, and the whole is the true sovereign. We obey to the whole, even if we participate to the whole. And here we have the self-government of a group. But what I want to emphasize is that we have no more the self-government of individuals, at least for some of the individuals. For Rousseau, except in the first time when people accept the social pact, there is unanimity. But when the social pact is done, we can use different phrasals of supermajority. Rousseau was not, contrary to Locke, for example, do not prescribe the very precise kind of phrasal. It could be variable. Nevertheless, there will be always a minority who is not obeying to herself. So we have, in all this view, we have to sacrifice, to accept that the self-government of the individuals is partial. And for me, it is a myth, because we cannot accept the idea of a society where all the decisions will be taken by unanimity. We know that unanimity is scarce, but it's possible. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes. But a society where unanimity will appear in each decision, it's not even conform to a human society. It's supposed it supposes a society of clones or a society of automatons, something like that. It supposes a society of individuals, of individual entities which are so simple that each react exactly in the same way to each kind of situations. So for me, it's not possible in human society. It is the reason why I think it's a myth. It's a concept which cannot have a counterparty in the human reality. So I have to go a little bit faster, because it would be good if I finished in 10 minutes to have time for discussing. Is it good for you? 10 minutes? I try. It will be difficult, but I tried. So I have to say, and it is a little bit strange, that this demanding formulation of self-government is not present in the theories of democracy I have read. So why to propose a demanding formulation which is not used by any philosophers in some way? So my purpose is not demystification, because there is nobody to demystify. But I think that the use of the concept of self-government is most often not enough precise, and tend to always I would say promettre in English. Promise to promise something more that we can give. And so for me, this formulation, demanding formulation of self-government, is not a means of demystification, but it is an analytic tool for reading the different conception of self-government. So now I can move to different conceptions of self-government, and I have no time to speak about all the four statements I gave earlier, but I would like to say a word about two great authors who use the notion of self-government not in this in the demanding formulation I gave earlier, and it is Hans Kelsen and Jürgen Habermas. Explicitly, Hans Kelsen is in his very great book about democracy. I don't know if it has been translated in Portuguese. It is very scarce. It has been translated in French very soon. I think it was in 1932. It's incredible because the book is from 1928. Usually the French translation are the late one. And it has been translated in English only 10 years ago, I guess. It is a very great book, and it is the book. I don't know of a book which for the first time tried to think democracy not by contrast with monarchies, old regime, but with the pathology of democracy, Bolshevism and fascism. It was too soon for Nazism. It's just after. So it's a great book. But the fact is that from the beginning he's quoting, he quoted Rousseau, and he's saying that democracy is a way to keep the liberty in social society. But it's not possible to keep completely liberty, as Rousseau wanted, in refusing representation. But democracy is an approximation of self-government. And for him, this approximation is given by the rule of majority. But the complete self-government would be given by the use of unanimity rule. Unanimity rule is not possible, it's too difficult. So we have to use majority rule, but not only because it is easier to have a decision, to get a decision, but because it is an it gives an approximation of a self-government. We have 50% plus 1 of the members of a group which are obeying themselves when the decision is taken. So for him, it's what the majority rule is a pillar of democracy, because it is the way to maximize liberty. And for him, it is an approximation. The other author is Jürgen Habermas, who is clearly conceiving democracy, modern democracy, representative democracy, as a form of approximation of self-government. And it has been clearly formulated in a text published in 1989, which has been translated in Portuguese by Rurion. The title is the Popular Sovereignty as Procedure. And for him, clearly, and it is a kind of quotation of Kant, democracy is self-legislation. And for him, but it is only an approximation of self-government, of self-legislation. But for him, the approximation, even if he is in favor of majority rule, and not of consensus, as Chantal Mouffe would like to think that Jürgen Habermas affirms, that's wrong. Jürgen Habermas, using an author of 19th century, has well formulate the greatness of a majority rule and the link between majority rule and argumentation. And this author of the 19th century is Freudel. So he is in favor of the use of majority rule. But for him, the way to approximate the self-legislation is deliberation. And you have a view of his conception of deliberation approximating the self-government in this few sentences in this text, Popular Sovereignty as Procedure, which has been put, I guess, in postface of Between Facts and Law, the great book of Habermas on democracy. Well, I have no time to read badly read in details this quotation. So this text is this translation is very approximative, because I use what is the name of this automatic translator? Yes, DeepL Pro from the French translation, because I don't know any English translation between the book between facts and law. I don't know. So I had not the English translation, so I made this, but you have an idea of the text. So, in the two cases, Hans Kelsen and Jürgen Habermas, I think that this idea of approximation meets great objections. In the case of Kelsen, I think there is two objections we can have. Can we really think that 50% plus 1 in the place of 100% is an approximation? It's a strange approximation in some way. And also, we can evoke the Anscombe paradox. The Anscombe paradox is in a paper of this famous English philosopher. She made a small case. She shaped a small case. For example, 10 individuals participating to 10 decisions with the rule majority. It could happen that a majority of 10 members will be more often, in a majority of cases, in the minority of 10 decisions. So it's not because you use majority rule, but you have a majority of people which are always in conformity with the majority of the decisions. And this idea, which is mathematically demonstrated in the paper of Anscombe, the mathematic property is the same as the Condorcet paradox, as the Arrow paradox, and so on, has been very well viewed by Benjamin Constant in one of his books. So the idea that the majority rule is a way of approximating the self-government is not completely convincing. In the case of Jürgen Habermas, it will need 1 hour of explanation because the text of Habermas is very rich and very difficult. But I think that the main argument we can have against is statement that it is an approximation of self-government by the way of deliberation, by the way of communication spheres, influences the political system. Is difficult to think that this influence is conform with the idea of self-government. In one sense, you have influence. Habermas is talking about siège. The English word is siège mode. As an army, all around a fortress, you know. It is the idea. So the communicative spheres, the communicative systems, all the conversation, the exchange between the citizens, by the way also of associations and so on, political parties, are influencing the political system. It's okay. It's a good view. Right? We can accept this view. But there is an asymmetry between influence and between government by political system. It is not nothing, but it is asymmetric. And I think that the idea of self-government implies symmetry. You cannot have self-government if you have not symmetry. I have no time for talking about another statement taken by a French philosopher who has published a very interesting book about deliberation in democracy. This book tried to take to draw the lessons of 30 years of thoughts about deliberative democracy. And the subtitle of the book is Inquiry in a Democratic Ideal. So it's a very interesting book, but I have no time to discuss his thesis. I would like to finish about the work of Bernard Manin and the statement of Bernard Manin. For him, representative democracy is not at all self-government. The idea that democracy is self-government belongs to common sense, or what he has called the ideology of democracy, or democratic ideology. It's a strange expression, but the fact is, for him, there is not self-government and in representative democracy, but there is 4 principles, and the name principle, the word principle is taken as the word institution of. So there is 4 institutions which are characterizing representative government. These 4 principles are partial independence of representatives, freedom of public opinion, I have to finish, the repeated character of election, and trial by discussion. In his view, it is not at all self-government, because there is a strong asymmetry between the fact that we can choose representatives by election and the fact that they govern in a very partial, independent way. They have a great liberty when they have been elected. Obviously, they have to respect the law and the political laws, the constitution, and so on. But they are quite free, because in the experience of the modern revolution, each time, at the beginning, the mandatory mandate have been evoked and have been given up. At the moment, for some months, some weeks, deputies were discussing the possibility of using mandatory mandate. It is a good word in English, mandatory mandate, you can say that. And it has been given up because it was too difficult to use it. So representatives are quite free, and the only strong power of the elected people is to vote in a way that they will be not elected another time. So the power of the elected people is mainly retrospective, because when they vote for representative, having an idea their program, what they can anticipate that the new representative, the new governors will do, it's only promise. There is no obligation. The representatives can govern as they want finally, even if they have to accept to be confronted to contestations because of the freedom of public opinion. But the strong power of electors in when they vote the second time for the new elections. But for all this working well, it needs the presence of a trial by discussion. And in representative democracy, you have a way, we need public debate about the publication and the possibility to debate, to evaluate the action. So it is the fourth principle is also very important. Obviously, in the fourth institution, you see what Habermas called deliberation in some way. I finish by the fourth statement. And in kind of conclusion, I would say that a consequence, one of the consequences of my view is that we have not to put at the same level participatory democracy and representative government. And we can think about that thanks to Bernard Manin, to the work of Bernard Manin. In some way, the book of Bernard Manin is not saying something quite important, but I think we can infer this statement from his book. There is a kind of incompleted of representative democracy. Trial by discussion, freedom of opinion, free elections, all of these institutions need a political life, what Habermas called the life of the associations, the communicative spheres. It needs a political life, people involved in citizenship, people contesting, and so on. And all this part cannot be completely organized. Political parties have this function when they appeared at the beginning of the 20th century. But it's not fixed by the institutions of representative government. And what we call participatory mechanisms of or participatory democracy, it is some tools, settings, procedures as participating budget, citizen assemblies, assemblies made by citizens which have been designated by lotteries and who are working together and proposing something to legislative assemblies. We have to think that they are not at the same level of the representative democracy. Very often, people advocating for participatory democracy think that they are doing something in competition to representative government, and very often they don't like representation. And there is a lot of people against democracy, participative democracy, because they think it is a competition, that it is in competition with representative government. I think if we read well Habermas as Bernard Manin, we can say that participatory democracy is not in competition with representative democracy. It's more in competition with political parties, for example. It's some settings for organizing partially political life. Political life we need for the representative democracy working well. But so it is not at all at the same way. But it is also to say that when we had participative democracy to representative democracy, we have no more self-government. We have always representative democracy, but we have a political life a little bit better organized. So that is the way I will finish this talk. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Professor Urfalino. It was a very interesting and a very clarifying lecture. I will open for questions. We have the tradition of opening first for students' questions. So I ask if there is any students. Gabriela, there is yeah. Make them in the microphone, please.
Thank you a lot for your talk, Professor. It was really interesting, and I do have a lot of questions, but I'll keep it to maybe 2 of them, if I can organize them so quickly. So first, coming from the end of your talk, I was thinking that maybe, are we thinking of this difference between individual self-government and group self-government that kind of relates to participation and representation in a way, the way you built it? Are we thinking also of a difference between, let's say, in private, the private sphere, or the private sphere in the work sphere, where you can make decisions collectively, like Carl Pateman has suggested, or something like that, versus the public sphere, where more disagreement comes upon, and then you do need mediation to organize disagreement. So is this a kind of way to reconcile both of the concepts, or both of the ideas, although coming together they're incompatible? You can have individual self-government and group self-government all at once, but if I got it right, you can have them separately, right? You could have them in different spheres, or maybe in different ways, even if individual self-government is not exactly all the way down. So that would be one question. And then the second question relates to that. When you say that, I agree that participation is not completely, participation and representation are different things, and they can be reconciled. So they're not in opposition, political participation and representation. But again, for some of the participatory democracy theories, that is precisely the point, that you can reconcile, right? So you have participation in the local level, and Jane Mansbridge is very clear in saying, if there is too much disagreement, we need representation. So participation, direct participation, can only happen in contexts where you have agreement in terms of how people live and how, so you can reach consensus, right? So you could reach consensus through participation, and not, so if you can't reach consensus, then let's appeal to representative ways of deciding, and then you scale that up. So the larger the community, or the more heterogeneous the community, more representation you need. So is that something that you're looking at, or is that what you've been thinking, that you can scale that up, in terms of participation belongs to the local level, where there is possibility of some sort of consensus, and then if not, we need representation, and that would be the way I can think of reconciling them both. And then finally, I think, can we think about self-government when we think about political participation, if we're considering political participation that has already a preordained form, you have already the mechanisms organized for for political participation? I'm thinking that one idea of self-government is related to popular sovereignty or constituent power that can, in fact, disorganize all these things that we think about when we're thinking about political participation and the theories of political participation that we have. So then, do we have self-government in that sense when we're thinking about political participation that is already organized and has already the mechanisms that are set up for it?
Okay.
Thank you.
I have to answer now?
Yeah, I think we have time, right?
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for this huge question, and very relevant and very interesting for me. Yes, it's very interesting to put in relationship individual and group self-government and representative democracy and participatory democracy. For me, participatory democracy is not democracy. It's a part of democracy.
Okay.
So this way to put title, it's very useful. But I think we are lost. But people talking about deliberative democracy, it's only that there is deliberation in democracy. So it is some title about some school of thought. But if you see the earth, the map, you have not a deliberative democracy, dictator, yes, but you have some democracies, and you are not there a deliberative democracy and there a participatory democracy. So it's not a way to qualify a political regime. Obviously, people who have gave these names knew that, but when we are using them, we can be lost. So for me to be quite tough, I would say participatory democracy is not democracy. It is very important for democracy. I think that representative democracy is the name of the political regime. And a big difference. It's for having a regime. You need to have a regime is the name for the organization of a political body. So, in this case, you have always in mind the whole, the members and the walls. The settings, the procedures of participatory democracy have never the whole involved. They have parts, and it is very good like that. If, for example, they are never mandatory. If they are mandatory, there is maybe a problem, because we can see that the parts will govern the whole. You know, in a way which is not legitimate, because it's always a part who was governing the whole in the name of the whole. Okay. But we have each time to know if the way a part is governing for the whole has been legitimated. There were, for example, a very good discussion, controversies about the last, not the last, but before the last citizen assembly in France. It was about climate change. So it was the first one in France, so there were a lot of social scientists watching it, and a lot of comments and a lot of controversies. It was very interesting. And one of the debate was what can we do, what we have to do with the result, the propositions of law, the propositions of a citizen assembly. In the original procedure, the idea was that the assembly will give a proposition, and the government and the legislative assemblies have to consider it and to do something, using the proposition, taking one, refusing another, and so on. But some people said this citizen assembly is the people. So the proposal of the citizen assembly has to become directly the law. Others told us that the proposition has to be given as a proposal in a referendum. And even the President of the Republic told to the members of the assembly, I will take all. Obviously, he didn't do that, but it was completely crazy to saying that, because it was maybe the fact of a prince, or it was a kind of constitutional coup. Right? It was strange to say that. But in fact, why there is all this position is in fact because we are not clear about the function of a citizen assembly. I think that the interest of this kind of assembly is that it produces the proposal, which is the proposal of something completely different, of the instances which ordinarily are giving proposal. It's not political parties, it's not trade unions, it's not experts. It is very different because the people are designated by lotteries. So for me, it's not representative in the statistic sense because it's only 50%, for example. But by the lotteries, we are sure that these people are different of the people which usually propose something. So it's original and it is interesting, but it's only a proposition. And it is good as a proposition. If we want to consider the proposition as a law, we change of constitution. Why not? But we have to discuss about it. Some people are proposing a second legislative assembly designated by lotteries. Why not? We can think about and we can discuss about. Personally, I'm against, because for the moment, for me there is a very good argument against it. It's that people which have been designated by lottery are not responsible. There is no accountability, because after the mandate they can go home. There is nothing. So election is a way to keep accountability, partially, but better than lottery. But it's a discussion we can have. But if lotteries assembly became the legislative assembly, we will have, in this case, the meaning is that we would have decided that these assemblies are representing the whole political body. Why not? But it's possible. But it's not the case now. So now, citizen assembly are proposing something to assemblies, legislative assemblies elected and government. So they are making proposition for a better working of representative democracy. But it is a proposition. So the question is, where is the legitimate representation of the whole? And when Mansbridge is talking about the consensus not possible when there is the consensus decision not possible when there is too strong I think she is completely right. But in this fact, consensus is for local communities, and we know that even in a lot of local communities it's not possible. So, but it's very interesting because in the background of the thinking of participative democracy, there is always the idea of unanimity, of consensus. And I think that it's not very good. But the fact is, I think that your question emphasizes very well the fact that it's not the same level, and we need both.
Should we do away with the idea of self-government altogether in representative democracies then? Like, should we not expect that as a normative expectation of representative democracy?
No, my position is to give up the concept of self-government, because this concept forget the main fact of political life and of political body, which is made with separations, and a way for having a non-tyrannic government is to keep the separation. So we have always people which are governing and people which are governed. The best way is to change them and to give the possibility of everybody to become representative, for example. But we cannot think about a situation where we were in the same time governors and governed. So, yes, my advocacy is for giving up the concept of self-government.
And what is left to democracy?
What?
What is left to democracy as an ideal? Do we have anything left, or should we just trust it as a regime?
No, I think the problem is the etymology. Democracy is power over demos. But power over demos is not very good. What we need is the authority over demos. And you know that in Aristotle, there is 6 regimes. There is the good one, which use the law. So you have monarchy, aristocracy. The good one with the law, and the bad one is without law. So it is tyranny, oligarchy, and the third bad one is democracy. And the word for the good one, it is politeia. So it's not very good for us because politeia, it's the whole polity and so on. So he has no name for the opposite of democracy. But democracy is badly viewed by Aristotle because it is the power of a demos without law. It's a kind of tyranny. So we are in some way lost by etymology, and we have to think our democracy, the good view we have of democracy, as a demoarchy, the authority of the demos. But the authority of the demos is supposing something else of only power. It's an organization. No, it is the way I can answer to your question.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions from students? If you prefer to make them in Portuguese, I can try to translate. No? There is a question from YouTube. I will read it, okay? It's from Sergio Mendonça Benedito. He asks, I'd like to know if the question of self-government for Professor Urfalino involves an understanding of the notion of the people. If some assume that the people conform to a certain social sector or a small part of it, it would be easier to achieve true self-government, right? This question, in one way or another, relates to the very practice of contemporary populism, I think. Thank you for the presentation, very interesting.
Thank you for the question. I think there is always, in some way, 3 acceptions of the word people. The people could be the plebe. In the Latin world, the people who are economically poor or without resources of many kinds. The people could be Vietnos, a part of a political population which has a specific language, specific customs, specific religion. And the specificity of populism is to say that the true people is the plebe or is the ethnos. The third notion of people is the people, for me, is the political notion of people. The people is the wall made by the citizens. They could have some customs a little bit different. They could have different religions and so on, different languages even. But politically, they are equals. They could be rich and they could be poor, but they are all the citizens and they have all the same rights. So we have these 3 conception of people, and populism of the leftist populism is in favor of giving to the plebe the status of a political body, and the right populism is in favor of giving the status of political body to the ethnos. So what I am thinking about self-governing is about my view of political people, which is the whole population having the status of citizen. So I guess it is an answer of the question.
Yeah, sure. Do we have questions from professors? Eunice?
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Eunice. I'm professor of modern political theory here. Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoy it very much. I would ask you 2 questions. I think they are very simple questions, but I'm curious about your answer. You totally convinced me that self-government is, from an analytical point of view, a flawed concept. It is too demanding and at the same time has little explanatory capacity. I agree with you. Nevertheless, perhaps we may say that we have a fascination for this concept, which is an affection perfectly attuned with the idea of myth. We cannot imagine a democratic society without imagining ourselves as equal individuals or as being governed by those who we all elected. We like to think about ourselves as autonomous subjects or sovereigns, as people to who belong the power to decide and to govern. So what I'm trying to highlight is the affective dimension of self-government. You have any thoughts about it? Because you just have dismissed the whole idea of self-government, but I think it still has an appeal, this passionate appeal. And my other question is about the rule of majority. It's true, we have to adopt a criterion to identify and judge democracy, but this criterion of the rule of majority is really democratical. You spoke about the almost impossibility of achieving consensus, but just look what happened recently at Putin's election. He almost reached consensus.
So we have
Putin's election.
Okay.
It was almost a consensus. Thank you. I'm sorry for the provocation.
No. Thank you so much for.
Avoid it.
And I think you gave a better formulation was I was saying that it is self-government is too demanding normatively and very with a very weak explanatory power. I think these 2 formulation is very good for me. I've written them. Very good words for that. Yes, I think it's very important what you have said about the passional appeal, the attractiveness of self-government. I am not sure to have an answer for the moment, but I think I have to keep in mind this question, because, and I would like to have a very good answer to it, because it is very important. I have only 2 work hypotheses for answering. The one in history of philosophy, and it belongs to the history of political philosophy. And I have in mind the Hannah Arendt and Jürgen Habermas, and the way Habermas used Hannah Arendt in a very interesting paper of 78. I think the title is the concept, the Hannah Arendt concept of power, where Jürgen Habermas put his communicational acting inside the space of appearance of Hannah Arendt. It's fascinating. I think it's completely not working, but it is fascinating the way he built concept and what it is behind. It is the fact that Hannah Arendt, as other philosophers and also activists in our times, have a view of political which has not to be instrumental. It was clear for Hannah Arendt in the human condition. She tried to convince us that the true politics, as it was in the Greek polis, was a space with no instrumental use of the others, because it was the model of the fabrication, and so it was against Plato and so on. The politics as fabrication, and there is always count behind, so the people have not to be the means for others. Okay. And Habermas used it because he was also against an instrumental view of politics, but he has to make some compromise. So he has a way to think in together, instrumental and non-instrumental, which is argumentation. So there is when you cannot, in the case of Habermas, you cannot completely give up instrumentality in politics. The only way is to say that you are your own instrument. It is self-government. Yeah. You accept to think government in an instrumental way, but for keeping in some way the same spirit, you have to say you are your own instrument. That is self-government. So it is my first work hypothesis. The other one, I lost it. The other one, no, I lost it. It will it will come back, I hope. But it's only some pistes of thinking. I have no true answer, but it is very yes. Yes, I find the other one. In my work about representative democracy, I think that for thinking about representative democracy, we have to take in account the fact that the thinking of democracy is always linked to a context, political context, philosophical context. For example, reading a lot of theories, I observe that when the idea of socialist democracy was not discredited, we were thinking democracy by comparison, by contrast with socialist democracy. So the authors didn't want to begin their reflection by putting the ideals, because if they put the ideals first, as Raymond Aron said in the 50s and the 60s, if we are discussing about people, about popular sovereignty, there are a lot of conception of definition, and there is no agreement. And in fact, it's a way for the communists to say that they are more democratic. So, Aron said, I have to think democracy from the institutional point of view. So democracy, liberal democracy, has to be think from the idea that there is several political parties, and communist or authoritarian regimes have to be think with a unique party. So institution first. When the idea of socialist democracy is completely discredited, people are beginning to think democracy from the ideals. And the question is how our democracy could be more democratic. There is no more comparison. It's very interesting when Habermas think democracy from the law, and when he is putting some contrast, it is from old regime, the metaphysic epoch in some way, and he made contrast between deliberative democracy, procedural democracy, republican democracy. Bernard Manin did quite the same, because the contrast he used strongly is with Athenian democracy, the use of lotteries or the use of elections. But there is no more thinking of a democracy in confrontation which is not at all democracy. And in Habermas' theories and in the thinking of participatory democracy, for example, Carol Pateman, it's clear that the ideals of democracy are very important in the thinking and at the beginning of a demonstration. So my idea is that the self-governing, the self-government, the theme of the self-government is attracted by the evocation of a democratic ideal when we put them at the beginning of a reflection. We cannot avoid the thinking about the ideals, but there is a difference when we are thinking democracy, beginning by the ideals or beginning by the institutions. So this is the kind of answer to your questions.
Thank you. Do you have more questions?
Thanks a lot, Professor, for your talk. So many interesting things and so many questions that we could raise today. I think that we are going to discuss your talk for many days now, because there are a lot of important aspects of your talk that it's also important to our research. And I know that Gabriela, maybe she has 100 of questions. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I would like to ask you just three small things. The first one is for you, is it the same thing if we talk about democracy as self-government? Is the same thing if we change the main concept and we talk about self-legislation or self-determination or self-realization? Are this concept the same for you or not? Because maybe, well, why I'm asking this actually is because the word Habermas never uses the word self-government. He would not accept that. It is impossible. There's no such a thing as a self-government. There's no such a thing as a big subject that can govern itself in our society. But that's a myth. It's impossible. So the word, even in Selbstregierung, self-government, Selbstverwandlung, self-administration, but he uses a lot in other words. that are words related to autonomy. There's a moment of autonomy in political life that for him it's very important to maintain and to understand, but not just to maintain, to understand that the citizens are somehow being motivated for this kind of ideal, because, and that's the second point. I'm not so sure if I agree with you that Habermas is best represented with the first statement that you mentioned. Representative democracy is an acceptable approximation to self-government. I think that Habermas parts from a different diagnosis. He's saying society is saying that representative democracy is not acceptable for them because there's something heteronomous in the representative democracy that can put in risk our own freedom, our own possibility of of autonomy, of political autonomy. So I know that this is very abstract, but it's how he tries to understand what is motivating society for a struggle for more freedom and for more democracy. He talks about radical democracy because this is a way to give an account of why society is struggling against the risk of their liberty. And so he's just trying to reconstruct processes that are already there in the social movements. And he's trying to explain social movements from this normative perspective. I know that you know this quite well, but I think that maybe it's different. And the last point is related to the question of you mentioned the asymmetry, related to Habermas' argument, and your objection is that there is asymmetry of power there, so then self-government is impossible. I think that Habermas would agree with you that there is an unquestionable asymmetry of power between civil society and political power or political system, because in our world that's impossible. There's nothing like a full autonomy. It's not possible in our world. But on the other hand, he would say that citizens continue to fight for more autonomy, on the other hand. So, then civil society's influence on the political system only happens for him in very rare moments, but it can happen. I know that there's a lot of obstacles and asymmetry of power, but sometimes it can happen. He says that just in moments of social crisis, with a lot of pressure from social movements and many acts of civil disobedience, for example, it could happen. In Brazil, we have many studies on institutionalization processes that rely on the participation of civil society. And, for example, legislation on gender violence against women and all the anti-racist legislation in Brazil, they were only possible because social movements, feminist movements, and the black movements, they fought hard to influence the political system. And I think that historically, we know that new laws were created and other laws were modified, decisions were modified. So something happened. I know that there are a lot of obstacles and asymmetries of power, but something happened. Citizens can change relations of power sometimes. So in normative terms, it is possible, so I would ask, is it possible to say that social movement itself is somehow guided by the idea that citizens don't just accept being the passive addressees of laws and passive addressees of political decisions, but they also want to assume the role of the authors, the role of the self-legislators. Is it possible to give some kind of account? I don't know. I'm just I would like just to
very interesting.
thank you a lot.
I'll just read Luciana's question because it relates with the beginning of Rurion's question. She asked, she said, thanks for a very interesting lecture, Professor Urfalino. Do you think the concept of self-government necessarily implies an idea of self-determination? Something that Rurion also asked in the beginning. Thank you, Luciana.
Thank you so much for all these questions, very, very useful and very important. And thank you, Rurion, for avoiding me to repeat something wrong. I have to be very cautious and never link Habermas with the idea of self-government. It is obviously not true, because he's not speaking of government, but of legislation. But so I have to modify my formulation, but I want to put it into the same movement. For answering your question, I will say government, self-government, self-legislation is not the same thing, but it's the same family. Obviously, for him, he is not thinking about government. He always prefers speaking of administration. For him, there is no government. I think it's a big problem in his theory. Because I think there is some government and not only administration. It's strange because it's kind of old regime view in some way. But never mind. His thinking is about self-legislation. So it's not the same. And he's speaking at the more large level of autonomy. Okay. My problem, I am very close to Habermas in his political view in general, but I never agree completely in the way he's conceptualizing it. Because deliberation is important, but I do not agree his view of deliberation and so on. What is my point? If you have a concept of autonomy, you have auto. And you have not something as auto without some agents, one or several. So my question is, which agent? If you are speaking with me about autonomy or heteronomy, which are the agent? In autonomy, the agent and the patient are the same. In heteronomy, they are not the same. But if you are speaking of autonomy, of self-government, of self-legislation, there is some agent. And I have to think about it. It's very complicated with Habermas because he accepts to skip the agent, speaking of systemic production and so on. But the systemic production is a power, is something producing. The system is producing something. Is it not at all an agent, this system? It's not, for me, it's not clear. I have difficulties to understand well what he is saying with these terms. So this is my answer to your first question. About asymmetry. I disagree finally completely, and thanks to your question, I am more able to formulate it. The idea that we are closer to symmetry when you have protestation, social crisis, civil disobedience, and so on. All these things are very important, but people involved in protestation, in civil disobedience, are they the whole? No, they are parts. And it is as parts that they are completely legitimate to protest in a representative democracy. And obviously they are parts of the people thinking about the whole, but they are not the whole. So they cannot say we are the self-government. It is for me it's a populist position. But they are participating in a very good way, and it could be in a very useful way, but also bad way, because protesters can be fascist, and we don't usually we don't think it's a good way, but nevertheless, they are part of a society, fighting, protesting, and by this way participating to the political life and to the transformation of the world. But for me, it's not self-something, you know. They are not the whole. So it is very good, it is very important, I agree completely, but it is not more self-something, self-legislation, because you have protestation and social crisis. I don't understand how it would be different, you know? So it's important, but it's not more self than political parties, voting, associations, and so on. I think it's a view, it's a strange view. It's a revolutionary view. It's a kind of nostalgia of a modern revolution where political people has been created at this time, but it is completely true. People change of status. We are the people before we were English citizens or before we were tiers état. Now we are all together the political people. In this revolution, you have the constitution of the political people. But now it's done. So people who are protesting, they are protesting as citizens and so on. They are not creating a new agent which is self-governing or which is hoping to self-govern. I don't think so. So self-governing and self-determination, maybe I'm not sure that depends on the sense of determination, but determination is, if it is determination of a decision, I understand. But if it is the determination of ourselves, it's a lot. So I don't know what is exactly the meaning of the term.
So, well, I would have maybe a final question if nobody more wants to ask. So, I would like to return to your discussion on Rousseau and the idea that in his social contract, the self-government of individuals is weakened or truncated to preserve the self-government of the body politic. Rousseau suffered a lot of criticism at the beginning of the 19th century, but there were also attempts to reformulate his theory to make it more compatible with individual freedom. And Benjamin Constant that you mentioned is one of those authors who criticized the Jacobin appropriation of Rousseau more than Rousseau himself, and who tried to make the principle of the sovereignty of the people compatible with individual freedom. In the first chapter of his Principles of Politics applicable to all representative governments, he writes that Rousseau was himself horrified by the size of the power he had attributed to the people, and thus tried to mitigate the consequences of this power. I quote Constant writing about Rousseau. He says, horror-struck at the immense social power which he had thus created, he did not know into whose hands to commit such monstrous force, and he could find no other protection against the danger inseparable from such sovereignty than an expedient which made its exercise impossible. He declared that sovereignty could not be alienated, delegated, or represented. This was equivalent to declaring, in other words, that it could not be exercised. It meant, in practice, destroying the principle which he had just proclaimed. End of quotation. And I quoted that because, in other words, Constant interprets Rousseau's principle of the sovereignty of the people as a negative principle, right, more than a positive one. He says that declaring that the people is sovereign means that no one or no group can claim a right to sovereignty, because only the people is sovereign, and the people cannot exercise this sovereignty because it cannot be represented. And that means that in practice, sovereignty as an absolute right to command does not exist, or at least it cannot be exercised. And this, in Constance's view, this results in the guarantee of individual freedom, or maybe we could say individual self-government, I don't know, but at least in matters of the private domain, there is a kind of self-government by the individual. My question is basically, what do you think of this liberal interpretation of Rousseau by Constant? Would you consider this idea of the sovereignty of the people as a negative principle, a way of reconciling individual self-government with a limited form of collective self-government?
Thank you so much. I don't know enough well Rousseau to be sure that the lecture of Constant was right or wrong, but I think it's a first step to think sovereignty negatively. Nobody can possess the sovereignty. It's the only way to say that everybody has the sovereignty, but it's not enough for having a government. So I think that the genius of representative democracy is to accept that some have to govern, but they have not constantly and completely the sovereignty. So you have the sovereign people, and you have who keep the sovereignty, and you have people who are acting as sovereign. And it's only for a time. And so the people can always protest. And the idea, sovereignty is always, no, it's not always, it's mainly negative in the way that nobody has completely and forever, for all the time, sovereignty. But we have to accept the separation. I like a lot a paper of Paul Ricoeur. He has written in 1957, just after the coup of Budapest. And he say, sovereign always made treason of sovereignty. But the main point is that they are never the same. So there is always a separation between sovereignty and the sovereign. And I think it is the point about the invention of representative democracy. That is the way I will answer to your question.
Do we have more questions? If not, I just say thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Philippe Urfalino. It was a very, very rich discussion. We'll be glad to have you more times here in our department.
Thank you for your questions.